welcome back to the afternoon, one of the first afternoon session actually, which is called Investment Forum. When we prepared this session, I was sitting down and asked myself, we're talking about venture capital here, and how large is the amount of venture capital really that flows into digital health? What magnitude does it have? So I went back to 2016, and this is a figure from Rock Health, who said that in 2016, around $4.2 billion have been invested in digital health. That was, as I said, 2016. Now, listening to a couple of investment people and hearing around a bit in the industry, it seems to me that in 2017, so since the beginning of this year, the situation became a little bit different. Capital is still there, but it seems that investors are growing a little bit more cautious. And one investor said, basically, we are still tap dancing, and there's a literal quote, we are still tap dancing, but we are knowing that we are tap dancing on increasingly thin ice. Now, I don't know whether this is the case. So if it's the case, what does that mean? What will companies need to do and need to prove in order to get hold of capital, and at what price can they acquire capital? These are some of the questions that we want to address this afternoon in this session. Also, a little bit of insight into how investors and how startup companies do judge investment climates in different regions and what they think a good investment climate is and should be. So for this, to answer these questions, we have three experts here. I want to start with the first speaker right away. And I have pleasure to welcome Clara Lenhardt to the stage. Clara is a senior associate at Digital Health Ventures. You know a little bit the situation from both sides of the tables. You have been working for big pharma, big life science, in that case Sanofi. But you also been working for startup companies. So as I said, beginning a little bit two sides of tables. You have been pretty much working around the globe, Germany, France, Australia, US. So you had a lot of experience, and we're all very much looking forward to hear your insights.
Good afternoon. Yes, that's good. Good afternoon, everyone. That's perfect. I took my tap dancing shoes. So as Rainer mentioned, so I'm part of the investment team at Digital Health Ventures. We are a venture capital firm based here in Berlin. We're investing across all Europe. So the fund itself is quite recent. So we started our investment period about a year ago. So we had the early days of our investment period. And of course, we would not have built this fund if we were not entirely bullish about the space of digital health. And we have that specificity of only investing in digital health. And so what I'd like to give you today is a bit of an overview of the investment landscape in digital health, mostly in Europe, because this is where we're mostly active. So giving you a bit of what studies are saying, but also a sneak peek of our deal flow, what we see, so that you can have a better understanding of how we look at companies and the type of companies that approach us today and that are looking for funding. Is this working this way? So before starting, I'd like to make a little definition about what we mean by digital health. And at Digital Health Venture, we like to segment the space by phases of the patient journey. Patient or even person, because for us, digital health starts with the healthy person and start with all the well-being and fitness. Then goes into prevention, then goes into all the solutions that are enabling or enhancing patient-doctor relationship. So this can be teleconsultation, this can be e-prescription. So even though that seems like simple technologies compared to everything we've been talking about since this morning, realistically, we still don't have that. So there is still some step forward to be done in that space, and it's still being considered as innovation. Then diagnostics and screening solutions. This can either be patient-centered diagnosis, so there are more and more tools directly for patients in order for them to have a better understanding of their symptoms and what could what could be the diagnostic for this, but also clinician-based diagnostics, and this would be more clinical decision support tools directly for physicians. And then last but not least, everything that is around disease management. And here there are 4 different categories. One would be the adherence. So how do you make sure that a patient takes the right drug at the right moment, at the right dose? Another one would be remote monitoring for clinical teams to actually track patient from the distance. A third one would be self-management, and that's really relevant in chronic diseases where patients have to take care of their own treatment and own therapy outside of the consultation with the doctor. And the last one, which I think is also interesting, is what we call digital therapy. And these are all the solutions that are replacing an actual in-person therapy thanks to digital tools. And so that's one of the cases in mental health. We see that in smoking cessation. We can see that in weight loss. We can see that in several fields where the whole therapy is actually being digitized. And so I give you a couple of examples of companies that would fall into the space. So you might know a couple. I put in black the one that are actually in Germany, so that you can see that there are things happening in Europe, and we definitely have nothing to be ashamed of, especially in Germany. And what is interesting is also the increasing level of interaction with the traditional healthcare system. So digital technologies are really going across the entire spectrum of what the patient interaction with the physician or the healthcare system should be. Now, let's have a look at the big picture of investment in digital health. So this is in Rock Health, as mentioned before. This is a company called Startup Health that you may know, and every year, and even every quarter, they release a report about the states of investment in digital health. And as you can see, so this was in September this year, and we already outperformed the year before, and we're already over 9 billion invested in digital health worldwide. Now, interesting fact is that 63% of these deals are actually seed or Series A. So this gives you an idea of the stage of development of companies that get funded. And the second one is that there are increasingly more deals in the United States. I think if you had looked at this chart probably 3 or 4 years ago, the vast majority of deals were in the US. And now, and I'll explain that later, there are more deals being done in Europe also because regulation are more friendly towards digital technologies and new business cases are possible. So what are the main drivers for investment and that growth of investment in digital health? The first one is that there is simply more money in the space and more money coming from more investors. Traditionally, if you had looked at the digital health investment landscape 2 years ago, you had either the traditional tech VCs that were quite reluctant to invest in healthcare because healthcare is regulated, it's complicated, or you had on the other end of that spectrum the traditional healthcare VCs that were investing more in medtech or biotech. And that in between, which were algorithm, which were digital tools, was a little bit of a lack in this investment spectrum. And this is exactly the value proposition of digital health ventures, is to be in that sweet spot. And what you see today is actually investors coming from both sides that are getting into digital health investments. So more money coming from more investors. The second one is that it's less risky to invest in digital health because there is more evidence. And before, there was a bit of a technological and clinical risk in investing in digital health because these solutions have not proven efficacy. Now here I gave a couple of solutions that actually ran clinical trial and showed efficacy of this solution in comparison with solutions that didn't have a digital components. One is Noom. Noom is a diabetes prevention program in the US. So they sometimes market themselves as a weight loss program, but mostly used for diabetes. And in the US, they use this in-person diabetes prevention program. And they have shown to actually have results that are just as good as what is being done in person, even though everything is being done digitally. Secondly, Proteus, that was the big news of last week, that Proteus, which is an ingestible sensor, just got FDA clearance for a drug that they develop in partnership with Otsuka for schizophrenia. And so right now there is an ingestible drug that has shown to be clinically proven to increase adherence and is now being reimbursed by have been cleared by the FDA. And the last one is that there is even more money, but this time coming from the customer side. So business models are being validated. if you look at the healthcare landscape, I'm sure I'm preaching to my own choir here, but there are many, many stakeholders. So hospitals, payers, clinicians, patients, and it was tricky to find out what the different business models were and who was going to pay for what. What you see today are regulation actually opening new business cases that were not possible before. So several examples. One is teleconsultation in Germany. So we're all expecting teleconsultation to be reimbursed in the coming years in Germany. The second one is, for example, the remote monitoring of chronic diseases in France. They're running pilots at the moment, where in 4 therapeutic area, don't remember exactly which one, but I know there is diabetes, chronic kidney failure. The solution provider and physician can actually now get paid for the remote monitoring of those patients. So just by creating a new reimbursement code, this opens up a whole new business case for startups that was just not possible before. Here's a little bit of the investment or investor mindset, because in an investment, people are looking for return on investment, so exit opportunities. And what has been validated in the space of digital health are the exit opportunities. If you look, exit opportunities in the space keep increasing. This is only stepping in 2015, but I can tell you that this has increased since. And the different exit opportunities, should that be either IPO, private equity, or M&A, have validated the fact that big players in the space from different type of industry, both from tech, pharma, or even payers, are interested in these type of solution. So there is also less of a risk in that sense because the path to exit is clear and therefore more attractive for investors. So let's have a look at what Startup Health considers as being hot. So this is a breakdown of the 9 billion that we saw in the first slide by category. And it's good because this is the topic of the conference. First one is big data and analytics. What I found interesting here is actually twofold. The first one is looking at the total raised in comparison with the number of deals. If you look at big data of analytics, or what they consider being big data and analytics, it's actually the highest number raised, but there weren't that many deals being done in big data and analytics. So these were companies that attracted a pretty large amount of funding per deal. Whereas if you look at patient and consumer experience, 121 deals being done, but still not at the top of the list. So I think this is something interesting to keep in mind in order to understand the different categories and how investors look at things. What I found also a little bit intriguing here is that for me, big data and analytics is not a category the same way that patient and consumer experience is, or the same way as research is. For me, big data and analytics is a tool, or it's a technology. And so it's hard, because you can improve a consumer or patient experience by using big data. And so when I looked at this chart, it was a bit difficult for me to understand which type of solution was falling in which category. And so what I want to give you is a bit of an overview of how we look at things and how we segment this. So just to give you another way of segmenting the market and how an investor from the space is looking at it. So here's what we see, I would say, behind the scene. So when preparing this presentation, I've been asked to outline a little bit of what we were looking for when evaluating startups. So here's a bit of a generic approach of the venture capitalist approach when looking at a solution and the investment criteria. So I think what's interesting is of course what's on the right side. So we look at both internal and external factors. Internal, first one would be, of course, a relevant, motivated, dedicated, and experienced team in the space. A product that is improving people's health, and as mentioned before, that has the clinical evidence, or at least the evidence that it is indeed improving people's health. So we would be looking at solutions that can show some evidence and that have run studies in order to prove this. We also look at solutions that can be scalable, as well as solution. We would typically invest at a seed and Series A round. So for us, this would mean close to commercialization with early traction in order to be able to validate that product market fit and how people are interacting with the product. So as mentioned before, for us, that business approach of understanding where do you fit in a workflow, where do you, in which pool of money are you tapping into, this would be something that we're closely looking at. And external factors, of course, as I mentioned before, the exit potential, favorable unit economics, so how much does it cost you to acquire a customer, and how much are actually your customer going to generate in revenues for you, and then the size of the market that will give us more of an estimate for the potential exits. Now here's a snapshot of our deal flow. The way we segment our deal flow is by technology and by purpose. Purpose for us is what is the goal of the solution that you're presenting. And so you can see there is disease management. So this is a little bit similar to what I have mentioned in the first slide with the different patient journey. And I think what's interesting here is if you had looked at this chart about 5 years ago, there would have been a massive chunk for wellness and for prevention. Digital health, 5 years ago, that was Fitbit, that was Withings, those were all these fitness trackers. And if you look at it today, the massive chunk is actually for disease management. So we're using tools today to help patients treat the disease and better manage their disease on a daily basis. So I think this is an interesting evolution of the space that we see. And now if you look at technology, I think what's also interesting is what we consider being AI and analytics. And that's a bit different from the chart, or at least the segmentation that we saw from Startup Health before, where they put this at the very top. And for us, AI and analytics, these are really solutions that are doing machine learning on a massive set of data. And I think AI or big data has been a buzzword, and I think we know it, and everyone claiming to do AI and machine learning. And really, realistically, this is the chunk of startup that we see that we consider are really doing AI and machine learning. So I think that's good to keep that in mind in order to look at the space and how far the space is actually in doing AI at the moment. I wanted to give you a bit of an overview also of, so one of the companies that we invested in this year, which is a company called Pflegetiger, and this is a digitally enabled home care agency. Let me say it straight, they're not doing machine learning. They're not claiming to do machine learning. However, they're using data, and they're using data in a smart way. And so I think for startups today, the reason why I'm bringing this up is that there is no need to claim to do machine learning today to actually have some value. And there is some pools of money and things to be improved and new business model to be created without necessarily having to deal with all the machine learning and technical technology issues. And so to give you an overview of Pflegetiger, so today what their value proposition is to be the best employer for care professionals as well as the best caregiver for patients. And the way they're doing this is actually by optimizing the routes and schedules of care professionals in order to improve the way care is being delivered. So here I listed the type of data that they might be gathering. So nothing groundbreaking about it, but they're gathering the patient location, the level of care that they need, what is their health status, what type of injection, or do they only need someone to wash the dishes, or do they need someone to actually be able to make injections? The schedules of the different care professionals, as well as the location of the care professional. And if you just optimize all this, you're able to create so much additional value compared to what is being done today. If you look at the home care market today, this is a highly fragmented market. It's very complicated to find someone, and even for a care professional, this is a very difficult job because you might end up having one appointment at one end of the city and then an appointment at the very other end of the city, and it's difficult to actually find someone that is going to be, sorry. It's difficult to find a provider that will be able to give you an easy and enjoyable work life. So I think this is just an interesting case of how to use data without having to necessarily do machine learning or big data. Now that being said, I'm not saying that big data is wrong, definitely not. I'm not saying that machine learning is wrong. I'm saying that, as Bill Gates mentioned, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years, and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10. And I think with machine learning and AI, that's a little bit what we're seeing right now, where we expect everything to change over the next 2 years, where everything is going to be radically disrupted, that doctors are no longer going to be needed. And I think there are many other technologies that will bring change over the next 2 years and that will improve the way care is being delivered in healthcare systems over the next 2 years. And I think the promises of AI and machine learning are going to come more over the next 10 years when there will be an adjustment of the regulation of the entire healthcare system that will be able to actually make them fit in the workflow. Thank you very much. So we haven't one at the moment. So right now we invested in 2 companies. As I mentioned, we're also a recent fund. And so we invested in one company that's active in teleconsultation, and then this one, Pflegetiger. But we're definitely not excluding investing in one company doing big data and machine learning. However, we would not invest for the sake of technology. We would look at what is the real value that the company is creating, and how does it fit into a specific business case. And so these are companies that are doing that already quite well, being able to analyze ECG and provide other generation for a clinical team in order to do remote monitoring. These are all business cases that make sense. So we will be looking at machine learning and big data from that angle.
Okay. Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you very much. Next on stage is Meinhard Schmidt. Meinhard is an independent healthcare executive, and I think you're more than 25 years in the industry, in medtech, diagnostics, digital health. You worked at big companies, you work with small companies, and you're having a number of board positions these days. So you got a vast experience and insight of what's really going on in the industry, and from perhaps also from a late stage investment perspective, and to that extent, very much looking forward to have you there. Thanks, Meinhard.
Yeah, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Rainer, for the words. Actually, really, it's counting up 25. I think it's in the meantime even more. And but let's keep it with 25 years. And one addition to Rainer's introduction, I'm also looking from an investor's perspective. So next to my board positions and supporting mainly startup companies in the field of oncology, medical devices and diagnostics. I'm also active in the field to support private equity as well as venture capital companies. And there's also a reason why I would like to give you a somewhat different presentation as what you normally hear from people like us. So just talking about the huge opportunities in investing into these kind of companies, but giving you more and also with aligned with a case study about what can happen when big data is taking over an industry, and that actually entire companies can disappear or entire industries can disappear. And this working on thin ice, that's actually also from our perspective is currently the case. And just to give you one example, I was last week I got a new report from Market and Sense. That's a market research company. And normally what I do when I look into with the diagnostics business, I review 10 to 15 companies. That is what I can oversee. Life science, maybe a little bit more. And then Market and Sense came out with a report about big data and IT health companies. And this list of companies was actually 400, more than 400 companies. I stopped counting after 400. And what I can tell you is that maybe in 2, 3, 4 years from now, we will not see even 20 of these companies still appearing on this list. And that is actually the big case and the big problem that we don't know from an investor's point of view who will actually survive. So I think this was already said by Clara, these introduction words, but just also to set the tone here a little bit, I was talking about this big data with a friend of mine. He is a former surgeon from the Mayo Clinic in Minneapolis, and I was asking him, what do you think? Actually, he is a former surgeon, I have to say, former surgeon of the head of surgeon department at Mayo Clinic. In the meantime, he is working as a CMO, as Chief Medical Officer at an IT company. And on my question, what do you think about big data? He said, big data is very easy to explain. Big data is big bullshit. So, nevertheless, I think we have seen a number of very good examples, and big data is making our life easier, better, making our life a better place. And actually, this evolution of the healthcare industry has brought up a number of innovative new startup companies, and a number of innovative startup opportunities for us. But it's not just opportunities, it's also some challenges, because once again, we don't know who will actually survive. And this all, I have to say, when I look into this world, I see one major trend, and that's caused by digitalization. And digitalization is around for many, many years. Healthcare is always one of the last industries where it's taking place. The world is going digital, but also now into healthcare, and that means the world is going decentralized, because everything, and I will give you an example from the computer industry, it always starts with centralization, and then it moves into decentralization once the digitalization takes place. This has led to an explosion in healthcare-related data generation. Software companies are actually the key in the value chain. And as always, that's what we have seen over the last 20 years. And we just have to look to the biggest companies in the world. In software, volume is king, and the winner takes it all. And why is it? Well, we just look to the digitalization, and Rainer, you said it this morning about this zettabytes. And just take this example of what happens currently in the medical device business. Digitalization typically results in more standardized hardware, but also in much, much more software. And when you look to the typical MRI scanner, and I don't know, you may know the code of lines of code. There's actually, when you program something, that is one line after the other. An MRI scanner is actually good for 20 million lines of code. A BMW is currently containing something like 200 million lines of code. MedTech applications will actually end up in billions lines of code. And then, back to my former statement about the winner takes it all in software, just this example, and there you can see how the industry will change, most probably. In cars, we have the number 2 is Toyota. The number 5 is currently Honda. The number 10 is Mercedes. In text processing, do you know who is the number 5? Or who's the number 3? We all work with Word. There is no number 3. And in medical scanners, we have only 3 companies dominating the entire business or the entire industry with more than 90% market share. GE, Siemens, and Philips. And my question is, will there be a number 3 in medical viewing software? So when it comes to digitalization, you will see that the winner takes it all again. And now to my point about centralization follows decentralization follows centralization. This is what we have seen over the last 50 years. Big houses or big rooms with computers, then the mainframes, the desktop computers, the laptops, and then finally what we have all in front of us, the little beds and even on our mobile phones. What we can see is that during this decentralization process, there are two observations what we have to consider. Every decentralization part, or every ring around this decentralization, was actually dominated by new companies. This one here, the first one, was dominated by IBM. Today, nobody's talking about IBM anymore in this part on the right side. And the other one is that with decentralization and digitalization, which each wave we spend far more percent in terms of GDP on computing than we ever did before. That means decentralization is a huge opportunity in terms of making money. When this is being transferred into healthcare, we have also seen the centralization, what you saw here with the mainframe computers. There's also what we have seen over the last 30 years in the hospitals. Surgical suites, specialty care, laboratory systems, the biggest laboratory systems. I was responsible for the laboratory systems at Roche Diagnostics. We sold the majority into the hospitals, into the base of the hospitals, because everybody wants to have everything in the hospitals. This is a picture of the Mayo Clinic with 800,000 patients every year. This is now changing. It's changing because of we have now the technology which makes it possible, and that is digitalization and it's big data. And what you see now is that from centralization, it goes now out of the hospitals, out of the central hospitals, into the world, with starting from automated kiosks, hospital at home, down to medical homes, care teams, home visits, retail clinics, work cycling. You count it up. So that means that what we have seen in computing is now happening in healthcare, and is following the same rules. Means with back to the two observations, every new move has new players. And what you have seen here, when it was about moving the laboratory systems into the hospitals, this was dominated by Siemens, by Bayer, by Roche Diagnostics, and so on. These players will definitely play no role in this part of decentralization, because they are not prepared for this, and we will see total new players in this decentralization phase. And what we also have to consider when we look from an investment point of view, the decentralization that follows centralization is only at the beginning at healthcare, and will not work just by plugging new technologies into old business models. This is one of the biggest things what we always see. People think that new wine in old pipes will work, but it doesn't. And I will give you one example how an entire industry has changed over the last 20, 30 years, a multi-billion industry, and Clara was already referring to this part as diabetes care.